Hello, Bio 130 students, and this will be the circulatory system, not the respiratory system, the circulatory system. And, well, hey, cool. Like the old saying, all roads lead to Rome, which was kind of accurate back in the, back when Rome actually mattered. Your circulatory system is a highway of veins and arteries that go throughout your entire body. Well, these are your blood vessels, and it's critical for function, for maintaining homeostasis of every system of your body. This thing is so important. Now, major parts, like with other body systems, the major parts of the cardiovascular or the circulatory system, well, as far as organs go and other components, your hearts. Your heart is the main organ of the circulatory system. It's the key thing that pumps your blood and all the things that your blood carries throughout your body to where it needs to go. That's really the only organ. Now, the other three components are going to be essentially the plumbing, which are your arteries and your veins. Arteries are going to be things that carry blood away from the heart, whereas veins are going to be vessels that carry blood back to the heart. In some cases, blood in the arteries may be oxygenated. Sometimes it may not have oxygen in it. Well, same thing for the veins. The key difference is arteries will carry blood away from the heart. The heart is pumping blood away from itself through arteries. And when blood is on its way back to the heart, it will travel through what are called veins. And the last major component of the circulatory system are the, blood. This is the liquid, this is the medium of the circulatory system, the transport medium. It transports everything: nutrients, hormones, oxygen, antibodies for your immune system, oxygen from your respiratory system, hormones from your, let's just say, nervous system, among other systems, endocrine, nutrients that have been absorbed through the digestive system. Again, all roads lead to Rome. All body systems are connected to the circulatory system, and vice versa. And the real last thing on this slide is defining what capillaries are, which are essentially very tiny vessels where arteries and veins meet up. These capillaries can sometimes be as small as a single blood cell in circumference. Capillaries, they're very small, but these are where arteries that are taking blood away from the heart transition into veins that will start taking the blood back to the heart. And, regions of the circulatory system are going to be, the following. Let's see, there will be pulmonary circulation, which is the transport of blood between the heart and the lungs. So if arteries take blood away from the heart, then pulmonary arteries take blood from the heart, push blood from the heart toward the lungs. And if veins take blood toward the heart, then pulmonary, which means lungs, pulmonary veins take blood from the lungs to the heart. Things like that. And then this one should be systemic circulation. And systemic is essentially the transfer of blood between the heart and all other parts of the body. So pulmonary is the travel of blood between the heart and lungs. Systemic circulation is the travel of blood between the heart and all other parts of the body. And then one not so talked about form of circulation is coronary circulation, which is really the transport of blood within the heart itself. And by that I mean to the different cells and tissues that actually compose of the heart. The heart also needs oxygen, oxygenated blood. So that will participate in coronary circulation. The heart is a very beautiful series of pumps and valves. Oh my gosh. So, as far as your instructor goes, this is my favorite by far system of the body. I love it. Now, the human heart, we're just talking about humans and, well, mammals in general. The human heart is very unique in that it has 4 chambers. 2 of them are called atria, and 2 of them are called ventricles. Whether blood, when blood is being pumped into the heart, they will enter through atria, which the left atrium or the right atrium, essentially blood is flowing into the heart into either the right atrium or the left atrium. And which it enters into depends on whether it's pulmonary circulation that's happening or systemic circulation. Now, no matter which atria you're talking about, blood will flow from either the right atrium to the right ventricle or the left atrium into the left ventricle. So ventricles, these are going to be dispersing chambers where blood is received into the heart by receiving them into atria. Once blood enters a ventricle, the pumping motion of the heart will push blood out of the ventricles into, well, the appropriate artery, whether the pulmonary artery or, well, the other arteries that go throughout the rest of the body. Let's put it this way. Now, for those who are able to interpret colors like blue and red, those are used to represent deoxygenated and oxygenated blood, which effectively means deoxygenated blood is when the red blood cells are no longer carrying oxygen. They are carrying carbon dioxide. Oxygenated blood means that the red blood cells are carrying oxygen. The right chambers deal with deoxygenated blood, whereas the left chambers deal with oxygenated blood. For example, blood that is traveling from, say, the arms or the legs that is traveling through veins back to the heart. This is blood that contains blood cells that have already transferred oxygen to the parts of the body that need it, to the cells that need it. And that deoxygenated blood, it's on its way back to the heart. Well, these will eventually enter into the right atrium through either the superior vena cava, whether it's coming from the upper part of the body, or through the inferior vena cava if it's blood traveling back to the heart through the lower body. And this deoxygenated blood will enter the right atrium, will then get pushed into the right ventricle, and then will get pumped into the pulmonary artery. That way, blood will travel through the pulmonary arteries into the left and right lung, where oxygen can then transfer into the bloodstream, and carbon dioxide can then transfer away from the bloodstream into the lungs. And then at this point, blood is now carrying oxygen again. Therefore, it will be represented with a red color. Therefore, blood that is coming back to the heart through the pulmonary veins now is oxygenated and will eventually enter into the left atrium of the heart, and then will get pumped into the left ventricle, which will then pump that blood into the aorta, which is a major connecting point where all the other arteries will eventually sprout off of. And well, after leaving the left ventricle, oxygenated blood will be carried to, say, the brain, to other parts of the body that will need that oxygen. And then oxygen will be released, carbon dioxide will be picked up by the blood, and then it will eventually travel back to the right atrium. Very special about our heart is something in particular, which is that we have a complete septum. And I have the septum of our heart. Essentially, it's this purple empty square. It is a physical mesh of tissue that physically separates our right ventricle from our left ventricle. That way, blood that has oxygen does not mix with blood that does not have oxygen. Essentially, if blood has no oxygen, then it can be focused toward the lungs where it can pick up oxygen efficiently, and if blood already has oxygen, it can be pumped efficiently into the aorta. That way there isn't, say, oxygenated blood that's getting pumped through the pulmonary arteries, and there isn't deoxygenated blood that's accidentally getting pumped into the aorta where it won't be able to usefully carry oxygen. Now, the heart, to go back into anatomical terminology, is located somewhat medial within the thoracic cavity, more toward the left side of the body. Well, if looking at the body dead on, then it is more toward, it's more toward the left side of the body. The left lung. The one closest to your left hand, essentially. So, heart, medial, more or less, not directly in the center, but more medial within the thoracic cavity. Definitely medial to the lungs. Now, this is a human heart. There are essentially 3 other types of heart systems, which are those that you'll see in fish, those that will be shown in reptiles and amphibians, and those that are shown in birds, and, well, mammals as well. Birds and mammals, heart system is very similar. Reptiles and amphibians have a similar type of circulatory system, and fish have a much more simpler type. Fish, more or less, have a 2-chambered heart, 1 atrium to receive blood and 1 ventricle to pump blood. And fish are very simple creatures, therefore they do not need to worry about having part of the heart focused on just receiving deoxygenated blood and part of the heart focused on just pumping oxygenated blood. Fish have a two-chambered heart, and essentially blood will get pumped to the gills where they'll pick up oxygen, and then blood will then travel to the parts of the body where it's needed, and then replace oxygen with carbon dioxide, carry that back to the heart, where it will be pumped from the ventricle back toward the gills. It's a very simple circle system, and for fish, it's good enough. Starting with all the other types of animals, that's where we start having part of the heart focused on pumping oxygenated blood and part of the heart focused on pumping deoxygenated blood. And it's very similar to what you will see in humans. Reptiles and amphibians essentially have a right atrium and right ventricle, which will pump deoxygenated blood toward the lungs where oxygen will get picked up. That blood will travel back into the left atrium, then the left ventricle, and be pumped into the other parts of the body where it is needed. Oxygen will get released to the parts of the body that need it. Carbon dioxide will get picked up, and that will travel back into the right atrium. Now, amphibians and reptiles, they do not have that septum that separates the right chambers from the left chambers of the heart. Therefore, there is some mixing of deoxygenated blood and oxygenated blood. Therefore, some oxygenated blood may end up going back to the lungs where it's not going to pick up more oxygen, and some deoxygenated blood may end up traveling back throughout the rest of the body before it can actually pick up oxygen. Therefore, it's not doing its function. And fish, their circulatory system works for them because it's simple, they're simple, it's good enough for them. Likewise, reptiles and amphibians, they do just fine without having that complete septum separating their right and left ventricles. So despite the fact that there's a little bit of mixing of purely oxygenated and purely deoxygenated blood, it's okay, it will work for them. For larger creatures like mammals, and for birds which are much more active in, say, flying, it is very critical that we have a distinct separation between our left and right atrium, or left and right ventricles, because this allows for a very efficient flow of blood. As said previously, the fact that we have a septum separating the right and left chambers of our heart, deoxygenated blood that's traveling from the veins into the right atrium and into the right ventricle can be focused back toward the lungs, where it will pick up oxygen and release carbon dioxide. And then oxygenated blood can be focused efficiently back toward the left atrium into the left ventricle and efficiently pumped to the rest of the body or throughout the body, head, arms, legs, intestines, where oxygen will be vital. So our four-chamber heart is by far the most efficient at flowing blood in such a way that oxygen can be received where it needs to go and carbon dioxide can be brought efficiently back into the lungs to be released through exhalation. And well, the heart that we have and that birds have, it's the most efficient at pumping. This doesn't mean that reptiles and amphibians or fish don't have a system that works just fine for them. They do. But for us, we definitely need the heart that we have. Otherwise, it would be very bad news bears, and we would not be able to do things like, say, running at the capacity that speed runners are able to do, marathon runners, or able to efficiently carry things that we are able to do, or birds would not be able to efficiently fly for long distances or as quickly to evade predators or to get to prey. Therefore, what each of these animals have is, for reptiles, amphibians, and fish, good enough for them. For birds and mammals like us, well, it's what we need, and it is very, very efficient, having a four-chambered heart for the kind of activities that we do. Just looking at pulmonary circulation again, essentially blood, the parts of pulmonary circulation, essentially blood that no longer has oxygen in it for the most part, but only has carbon dioxide, travels back to the heart and gets received into the right atrium, pumped into the right ventricle, and then gets pumped toward each lung through what are called pulmonary veins. Pulmonary because it involves the lungs, veins because it involves pumping blood away from the heart. And in the lungs, blood will pick up oxygen, release carbon dioxide, will flow back to the heart through pulmonary arteries. Arteries because these are taking blood toward the heart. And these will enter into the left atrium and then the left ventricle. That past slide was pulmonary circulation. This current slide is essentially all the nuts and bolts of systemic circulation when just looking at the heart. So, essentially, systemic circulation does involve the flow of blood coming back to the heart when it's deoxygenated through the superior vena cava, where essentially deoxygenated blood is flowing from the heart or from the arms and the head back to the heart, or the flowing into the inferior vena cava, which is essentially where veins from the lower parts of the body, legs, back, things like that, all eventually come together into the inferior vena cava to enter into the right atrium. Now then, going back into the pulmonary arteries, blood that now has oxygen flows from the lungs into the left atrium and then into the left ventricle, can then be pumped into the aorta, a massive junction of the artery of the systemic circulatory system's artery. And at this point, you can have essentially, say, was represented in the image by number 1. Branch 1 of the aortic arch is essentially the right subclavian and the right carotid artery, which takes blood to the right arm and up to the brain. Also the left carotid artery, which takes blood to the head. And then the left subclavian, which takes blood to the arm. Number 3. And then further down past the aorta, blood can travel through what will break off into other arteries to flow throughout the rest of the body. Well, I should have waited till I got to this slide. Essentially what I'm referring to is the descending thoracic aorta. This is the part of the artery that comes past that where blood flows from the aortic arch. It can then travel down into the descending thoracic aorta, which takes blood to the lower parts of the body, the legs, the lower back, parts of the internal organs in the abdominal pelvic system, all throughout those lower regions. Eventually, this will become the abdominal aorta once it goes past the diaphragm. The ascending aorta is essentially the artery that comes directly off of the left ventricle, where oxygenated blood is leaving the heart, is leaving the heart. If I said earlier that blood flows toward the heart through veins, blood flows away from the heart through arteries. And therefore, blood flows away from the heart from the right atrium. Oxygenated blood flows away from the heart from the left atrium, from the left ventricle, into the ascending aorta through the aortic arch, which has those three little branches for the upper parts of the body, and then travels into the descending thoracic aorta. Blood cells are not a cell in the traditional sense. They are primarily focused on transporting oxygen away from the lungs toward every other part of the body. And once oxygen gets used up by cells wherever that is, those cells produce carbon dioxide, which then red blood cells will pick up and transport eventually back to the lungs to be replaced with oxygen. Red blood cells, again, they're not cells in the typical sense. They do not have a nucleus, and they do not have mitochondria, which is very important because mitochondria essentially are the energy-producing warehouses of a cell. Therefore, if red blood cells had mitochondria, they would actually use up the oxygen that they were carrying, which would diminish the efficiency of carrying oxygen to the other parts of the body. The only true cell on this list would be white blood cells. These have a nucleus, these have organelles. These are part of your immune system, which are important for your circulatory system in fighting foreign invaders that have entered your bloodstream. These are meant to survive a lot longer than red blood cells. Therefore, they do have mitochondria. Therefore, they do have the ability to convert resources into energy molecules that they themselves can use for survival. And then the least cell-like of all the blood cells is actually platelets. These are actually these aren't cells by any means. Platelets are actually parts of a larger cell located in the bone marrow. And essentially, parts of that cell break off and become what are platelets. So these are essentially fragments of a much larger cell. And platelets are used to essentially repair damages in arteries, cuts in veins, or cuts in the skin, places where blood is flowing where it shouldn't, flowing out where it shouldn't. And they help us reseal, say, the skin so that invaders are not entering. Whew. And that includes our basic lesson number 1 for the circulatory system. So just past the 29-minute mark, this will conclude the major parts of the circulatory system. The next lesson will consist of essentially blood types and, just 2 diseases that could be seen in the circulatory system.